Hey, reminder, everybody, we're opening up the phone lines. In fact, they're open right now. You see the number at the bottom of your screen. We do this on Fridays here. Lighten things up a little bit and also test you on your knowledge. 38766-2428. That's the toll-free number here. We'll ask you questions. You win something, and it's fun. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. So if you're not on the lines, join us now. Okay. Let's get into some foreign policy stuff. We're going to go to some key hotspots here and get our guest take on where we are now and also where we very well may be in the not-too-distant future. And let's start with the war on ISIS. Majority of Americans very confident or somewhat confident that the U.S. and its allies can defeat ISIS. And it seems the American public, they're ready to do something about it, including putting American boots on the ground if that's what it takes. In fact, a new Q poll out today shows that the majority of American voters support sending U.S. ground troops to fight the terror group in Iraq and Syria. And I'm not talking by a razor-thin margin. Poll shows 62% of American voters back the idea of a ground troop operation, while only 30% of Americans don't. Let's start with that issue, and let's bring in Matthew Schmidt, an assistant professor of national security and political science at the University of New Haven. Matthew's also a contributor to the Matters Military blog hosted by the Georgetown Journal of International Affairs. He also was on the ground in the Ukraine. We'll talk in a little bit during their elections. And the appetite for this, I was shocked by. And it wasn't just one poll. Now, they didn't define how many troops or whatever, but they said, well, is your biggest concern doing too much or too little? They said, we're concerned we're going to do too little. Is it as simple as they're not just bad guys, they're awful, awful guys, and they behead people? Is that enough of a distinction? Because if we asked them about Al-Qaeda, I guarantee the numbers would have been flipped.
Yeah, I think that ISIS's moves to behead these journalists, to post it online, that this has had, in a sense, a kind of counterproductive effect on the American public as far as ISIS is concerned, because it's whipped up war fever.
Well, you had an interesting point, which was you think the tide may turn here because wherever, like a virus, ISIS has expanded to throughout the Middle East, they've left a bad taste in the mouths of all the populations that they've come in. There's been no, building here with milk and honey. I mean, you
Right.
said everybody has had it with them.
Yeah, everybody hates them. Look, ISIS purports to be a Sunni religious group, but most of the Sunnis reject their interpretation of Sunni Islam. So you have the Saudis lining up and all the Gulf states, the Qataris and the UAE, everybody lining up to provide money, arms, right, personnel to go in and fight ISIS. And then on the other side of the coin, you have the Shia state of Iran, who's basically running the ground war. And you have this bizarre situation where our Air Force is dropping bombs sort of, kind of, according to what the Iranian general on the ground wants us to do. There's the Iraqi intermediary, but everybody understands that it's the Iranians that are telling us where to attack ISIS.
And even the Jordanians have a self-interest after what happened to one of their own here. But I'm surprised, at least, it's expanded to the point that it has with how many beachheads ISIS has. Do you think we're reaching a tipping point?
I don't think that ISIS wins in the long term because everybody hates them, right? So they have, every time they take over a place, they have a population now that ends up sort of fighting against them on the backside. It's just a matter of time. The other thing is that they can't generate their own weapons, and they're not able to generate a large amount of fighters, and so we're essentially killing more than they can generate over time.
Andrew, we've talked about appetite from the American public for war. In fact, we even saw Republicans in recent elections backing off of it somewhat. Rand Paul, I think most notably, was just like, no more intervention. Let me be clear. I was shocked by that poll. Weren't you?
Not really. I mean, because I think it speaks to the somewhat knee-jerk reaction that Americans tend to have about possible foreign conflicts.
I'm with you if you limit it to drones, but you weren't surprised by ground troops?
No, because we sort of get stirred up into the fervor over the flavor of the month of who our enemy happens to be at this time, and we see the videos of the beheadings, and it's horrible, and we think horrible thoughts about it, and we want to get involved, and ground troops seems like, well, okay, let's go kick some butt and solve that problem and move on. But I mean, if you asked Americans, do you want to send more ground troops in to deal with Al-Qaeda or to deal with instability, in Baghdad, not in ISIS-controlled parts, I don't think it would be there. And I think it would be short-lived. If we did put ground troops on the ground to deal with ISIS, I think the American public would soften, or I'm sorry, would start getting opposed to that rather quickly.
Richard, I was surprised by the findings of the poll. The actions, and it's good you have an expert here that can talk about this, but the actions of ISIS has been so barbaric that I think that's why we're seeing polling reflecting an almost seismic change in terms of the other way. The sentiment here in America was no boots on the ground. We've had it. We've spent billions. We're done. The American economy, American soldiers' lives. But their actions are so outrageous that I think Americans really do want to put an end to this problem.
Well, let's be clear here too. We do have boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And we have authorized them to engage in combat under constrained conditions, but make no mistake about it, Americans are on the ground fighting ISIS directly right now.
The question, though, is what could it expand to, the mission creep, all those things we talk about now. Staying in the Middle East here, Iran, obviously a huge topic this week. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech before Congress on Tuesday still is having a lot of political impact both here and in Israel, as well as, for that matter, Iran as well. Netanyahu addressed Congress without the support, as you know, of President Obama and many House Democratic leaders. In fact, 50-some-odd lawmakers didn't even show. Prime Minister insisted that the U.S. should hold out for a better deal with Iran and worried against making a quote-unquote bad deal, despite the fact that the details of the agreement have not even been released.
This deal has two major concessions. One, leaving Iran with a vast nuclear program. And two, lifting the restrictions on that program in about a decade. That's why this deal is so bad. It doesn't block Iran's path to the bomb. It paves Iran's path to the bomb.
And I'm curious, and this was the view on Netanyahu, and this was after the speech that he addressed. Listen, he gave a good speech. He certainly acted like he owned the room. Just from an optics standpoint, I don't care the politics, Republican, Democrat, his politics or not. Talk about having some pretty good you-know-what. He literally, he owned the place here, and he's telling us what to do with foreign policy, even though we're giving $5 billion in aid on an annual basis. But yet he's telling us what to do military and who we should or shouldn't have conversations with and on what terms. I don't know. I thought that was, to put it politely, presumptuous.
You know, he brought his full mojo. It was a great speech, and like you said, he owned the room, and he was doing exactly what you're saying. The problem is that he was so good on the surface that he slid things in there. So, for instance, he used quotes from the former president of Iran, who said lots of nasty things about Israel, but is not the current president of Iran. And so you have that kind of thing going on. He selectively drops Bible quotes here and there, and he wasn't speaking to a sophisticated audience. He was speaking to the Congress.
He gave a shout out to Moses, who was in the right, on the wall. So my question, though, is, you know the history here. What should we be asking for? And can there be a deal that we could get where it's not just trust but verify? To the point that not just Netanyahu and others is, you can't trust these guys. Is there anything that the American public could be comfortable with that we could have unfettered inspections or we could have an idea what they were actually doing?
I think that the deal on the table, frankly, is pretty good. I understand Netanyahu's point of, well, we'd like the deadline to move out, beyond 10 years, but come on, if you get 10 years, and 8 years in, you find out that the Iranians are starting to violate it again, you renegotiate it, you threaten again, you can go back to the table. You got 8 years. So I think it's a pretty good deal right now, and there are verification clauses in the current deal. This is Netanyahu is not being fair about what the deal is that's on the table right now.
Here's the part that I don't get. We know what Iran's doing right now. We're able to spy on them with satellites. We're able to spy on them with other technology, with online technology and other methods. Netanyahu knows what Iran is doing. They're not James Bond or anything. If they start reconstituting a nuclear program, we're going to know about it. So I'm not sure how much there really can be beyond trust but verify. I mean,
also, Mossad kind of contradicted what he said himself.
Well, they've been a year away from the bomb for 15 years.
Right.
So,
right.
I'm not sure how much more you can get out of a deal, except let's have them start reducing their nuclear capabilities.
He did accomplish what he wanted, though, didn't he?
Well, I guess his reelection effort, back home in less than 2 weeks, But here's my question. I don't think the relationship between Israel and the U.S. will change. It should not change. It should remain a strong ally and relationship. But the speech struck me, to use Andrew's word, what I don't understand. When Mr. Netanyahu walked in, it just felt like a State of the Union address.
It did.
And it was like, I thought that was reserved for an American president. And because the Republican-led controlled Congress wants to make Obama look bad, and I guess it's vice versa, they take turns making each other look bad. But in this case, Speaker Boehner used, in my opinion, Mr. Netanyahu to achieve his goal and Netanyahu's goal at the same time. I mean, let's be honest. Obama and Netanyahu are not the greatest of friends.
No, I'm just sorry. It didn't feel right. And again, it wouldn't feel right if Democrats did that to a sitting Republican president. I get it. We got dysfunction, we got fighting, but there are lines, and I thought one was crossed on Tuesday. All right. Let's go to the Ukraine now, where tensions, does this sound familiar, are continuing to rise. Authorities now reporting that 2 Russian bombers diverted commercial airline traffic flying in and out of Ireland. The incident happened last month. However, Irish authorities just reported on it Wednesday. Russian warplanes were crossing commercial traffic airways. A ceasefire agreement required all foreign troops to leave Ukraine. However, government officials in the country say they believe that Russian troops are still entering the country. And Matthew, I know you spoke to folks on the ground here as recently as this week. Where are we right now? Because I thought that there was finally a thaw and things were getting back to some sense of normalcy here, but it seems the tensions are ratcheted up all over again.
So 3 big things have happened. A few months ago, the international airport in Donetsk, the major city in the rebel-controlled territory, was taken back by the rebels. The second thing is that a few weeks ago, a place called Debaltseve, which is a rail and road junction, was taken by the rebels. So it was held by Ukrainian troops. It was kind of a bubble, right, like a bulge, and it was closed in and taken by Russian rebels. And that allowed the rebels to have a complete rail and road system now under their control. And the third area now is currently under the control of the Ukrainian government. It's a port city on the Azov Sea into the Black Sea called Mariupol, and that's where everybody expects the fighting to move next.
What is the end game of Putin here?
What Putin is trying to do, I think, is create a frozen conflict in Ukraine, like he's done in Georgia, like he's done in Moldova. And what that will allow him to do is ratchet up or down the violence in order to put pressure on the government in Kiev to control their policy. And his chief interest is to prevent Kiev from becoming part of the European Union or part of NATO. And this is his tool for doing it.
And economy has gone from bad to worse in Russia. Putin did some symbolic thing where he cut his salary by 10%, and then others as well here. Is there a risk for him that things start percolating on the streets? The folks have had it.
There's a risk, but it's not very high.
Certainly in conjunction also with any dissenting voices.
Right.
And,
so one of the key dissenting voices was just assassinated, Boris Nemtsov. So no, I don't think that there's a real risk that there will be a revolution in Moscow anytime soon to overthrow Putin. He's secure.
At what point does NATO have to get involved in here? Because there are treaty obligations that and when you start threatening NATO allies like Ireland.
Right. Well, so what the Russians are doing in Ireland and the Baltics, all this stuff with the aircraft and the ships and things like that, these are games that were played in the Cold War. They've just sort of stopped for the last 20 years and picking back up, right?
Matthew Broderick will play the sequel, yes. Okay, when we come back here, we're going to go from senators in potential trouble and trouble in hotspots around the world to some trivia here. We are opening up phone lines. In fact, they are open. If you haven't joined us already, do so. I'm going to ask you some questions. If you get it right, you'll win something. And we'll also bat it around at the table as well here. 888-766-2428. Your calls on the other side of the break.